So tonight we're talking a little bit about harmonic rhythm. Going to show you kind of how it works in one of the first pieces we're going to analyze in depth. We're going to use this piece, and then, I haven't prepped this, but we're going to try and figure out exactly how. So we're going to talk about how we're going to attempt to see how Bartok uses this concept of harmonic rhythm in a more complex work. So the basic idea behind harmonic rhythm is pretty simple. A lot of people use it. A lot of composers use it, but sometimes it's not always straightforward. So in this piece, I'm choosing this because it's a pretty clear example of harmonic rhythm. The idea behind harmonic rhythm is, of course, you have your motives and you have your melodies, and these things help tie the piece together. But one of the sort of subtler features is how the harmonies shift underneath these melodies and rhythms. And in the classical period, you could clearly hear a harmonic rhythm. In the Romantic period, you could still pretty clearly hear a harmonic rhythm, but the chords might shift a little bit more slowly and be a little more chromatic, but you can still feel this concept of harmonic rhythm. And then in the modern period, it really changes. We don't so much have this idea of harmonic rhythm anymore. So what is harmonic rhythm, right? It's basically how often the chords change in a piece per unit of time, and we usually base that on the measure. So if you have two chords in measure one, we expect to have two chords in measure two. It tends to be pretty consistent. And so what we see in this Beethoven piece is we really don't have a chord at all in the first measure. But it is outlining and implying a harmony. So if we were to try and figure out the harmonic rhythm, we might say there's one chord in this measure. We go on to the next measure and we see that that chord is repeated. So even though it's repeated three times, that doesn't mean there's three chords in this measure. It means there's one harmony in the measure. So we'd say there's one chord in this measure as well. Go into the next one, there's one chord. And what tends to happen is whatever harmonic rhythm is set up at the beginning, that's what continues throughout the piece until you get to a cadence point. So if we analyze all these are all just one chord per measure. And where does it change? Right here at the cadence in measure 7 and 8, I think. Here we have two chords, and then we go back to one chord. So the composers, is one of the ways to signal the end of a phrase, they'd always change a harmonic rhythm. When they don't do it, it kind of lessens the impact of the cadence, but they might do it for a reason. They might do it because they don't want to have a clear signal that the phrase is coming to an end. So the idea here, if we keep going through this, is we would expect to see that harmonic rhythm throughout most of the piece. If it does change, then we're probably dealing with a new section. So what Beethoven's doing here is, even though we only have one chord per measure, he's kind of creating this repetitive rhythmic figure with the harmony too. That's not really harmonic rhythm. That's just a way to keep pushing the energy forward and to re-articulate the harmony. So if we keep going through this, over here, we see that it's clearly just one chord per measure. He's making it even more obvious now. So one of the things that Beethoven does that's interesting is he hides the harmonic rhythm at first, because in the first measure, you just have the arpeggiation. Then in the second measure, you get three chords, which at the first time we hear it, we might think, oh, there's three chords in that measure. But as we keep going, we keep hearing it again, we realize it's just one chord. But he's not giving it to us on the downbeat. So he's obscuring the harmonic rhythm just a little bit. But in hindsight, we realize there was mostly just one chord per measure throughout the entire opening. So here, when we get into the transition section, all of a sudden, he's giving it to us on the downbeat, which is interesting because the transition is where things break apart, where you use a lot of fragmentation. So when the motivic materials get more complex, this harmonic rhythm gets clearer. It's like a way of clearly articulating each one of these figures, each one of these dun 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 dun, these little triplet figures that really stand out as unique materials within the fabric. So now we enter a B section. So he's going to change the harmonic rhythm. We really have two chords. Here, even though it's on beat 1 and beat 4, it's two chords. So here he's combining harmonic rhythm, and he's got kind of a 2-measure sequence. He's combining harmonic rhythm with an actual rhythm. So half note, quarter note, rest, rest, quarter. Bum, 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 right? And he does that. Let's see how long he does it for. He does it for the first 4 measures, so the first half of the phrase. The second part of the phrase, he is starting to make it harder to hear the changes because now he's using these 8 notes. So he's increasing the rhythm, but he's going back really to, you had 2 chords here, and then it goes back to 1 chord per measure. And then we have 2 here, but he's changing the harmonic rhythm up. So the idea behind harmonic rhythm is that the melody should somewhat dictate what the harmonic rhythm is. So if we look at the first measure, that's just an F minor chord. It's only going to be 1 chord. The next measure, we have that F in the A flat, still F minor, so it's just 1 chord. And then in the next measure, we see there's still just 1 chord for the entire measure. So that means a harmonic rhythm is still 1 chord for the measure. So if you are noticing that your piece doesn't have sort of this forward motion, or it feels like it's meandering, harmonic rhythm could fix it. But if you're a modern composer who's not writing tonal music, how do you make this work? How do you keep the motion moving forward without having these structural chords that we have in tonal music? So, any questions on this before I go on? Because we're going to talk about Bartok a little bit. I always have to give it a second because it takes a while to find that mute button. All right, well, you have until I bring up Bartok. So with Bartok, what are the chords? Like what's going on here in the first couple measures? We don't really have traditional harmonies. This is very contrapuntal. So this is where each piece in the modern period, this is where it gets complicated because every new piece in a modern work, you almost have to analyze it on its own merits. And what happens is you start to notice certain things that modern composers do over and over again. But that doesn't mean that from one piece to the next, they're going to use the same techniques. So going back to this idea of harmonic rhythm, what's the point of harmonic rhythm? The point of harmonic rhythm is to create that sort of expected energy that pushes the phrase forward. It does it consistently so that we're kind of like on a train at a certain point. It's just very rhythmical. And then at a cadence, something changes. So either the harmonic rhythm increases, decreases, or they'll actually put the chords in a different place in the measure. Harmonic rhythm is actually really important when analyzing music because it can tell you what's important. Sometimes, and this is the thing we don't really talk about too much in theory, and I don't know why, but sometimes when you analyze a work, you're having trouble determining, is that a 7 chord, a leading tone chord, or is it a dominant? Or is it a leading tone chord that then goes into a dominant? Basically, in a nutshell, each new piece in the modern period, we have to evaluate on its own merits. And so in the classical period, harmonic rhythm was pretty standardized. It's like you had a certain number of chords per measure, and that kept up until the cadence. At the cadence point, something would usually change. Not always, but most of the time something would change. And that would alert us to a cadence. It would either speed up the harmonic rhythm, so you get more chords in the measure. Maybe the metrical division of the harmonic rhythm would change. Like in the Beethoven piece, you got dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun. that is a rhythm that's supporting the harmonic rhythm, right? So generally at the cadence, something would change to alert you that there is a cadence. Okay. So in the Bartok piece, what is going on? What is holding this piece together? And you almost have to take a guess to try and figure out what he's doing, because it starts with kind of this languishing figure. Let me make sure original sound's on. It's not. All right, so you have this opening figure. Right? So what's happening here? What's the harmonic rhythm? How many chords are there in that measure? Does anybody know? I don't know either, right? It's very contrapuntal. So Bartok is using something different. He is creating these contrapuntal lines, and he has to try and express some sort of harmonic motion to keep the piece moving forward. And so the thing that I noticed when playing it is you kind of have a note on every beat. And then we change it. So what we could do is take kind of a hypothesis and say, okay, in the first measure, I've got a quarter note here. I've got a quarter note here. I've got one on the third beat, and then I have this and this. So you break down that first measure into a rhythm. So effectively what's happening is, because there's an articulation on every single one of those beats. So in a classical piece, we'd expect that rhythm to continue. Does Bartok do that? Let's find out. It's like you're being a little detective here. So here we have the D on the downbeat, then we have beat 2. Okay, so far our rhythm is so we kind of have to keep going and see if we can see any rhyme or reason to what he's doing. And I honestly don't know what we're going to find because I've never done this before with this piece. But you tend to find something if you just approach it this way. Okay, so now we just have straight eighth note punctuations throughout the entire measure. So, kind of going back to that original theme a little bit, what does he do now? That's lined up with the C flat. Okay, so we go back and we say this is kind of like rhythm number 1. This is rhythm number 2. This is rhythm number 3. Here we have rhythm number 2 coming back. And then we have rhythm number 3. So I'm actually going to stop writing these out if they're the same. We basically so far have rhythm 1, 2, and 3. So he goes 1, 2, 3, 2, 3. And then in the next measure, he takes it and he escalates it even further. This is a very time-consuming thing, but it does sort of illuminate something. Effectively, we have that rhythm. We're going to try and do the entire opening phrase here. Okay, so what he's doing here, we're not really uncovering a great consistency in harmonic rhythm, but we found 3 rhythms that he's using, and then he really does introduce sort of a rhythm 4 and a rhythm 5. And so if we were to dig into this even more deeply, we might start to discover really what's happening here is we've got 2 other motives. Like you've kind of got this idea here and this idea here, but we'd have to really analyze the whole piece in this way to figure out if there's any relationship between this rhythm and everything else that's going on. And I can tell you that Bartok was one of those composers that was pretty methodical about what they did. And one of the things about Bartok is he believed in catharsis through music. So he was hoping that he could create these compositions that would be so dissonant, so stressful in a way that people could actually listen to it, vent through the music in a way, because they could listen to the music and it would sort of reflect the chaos in their own mind. And then through the rhythms and climactic points, they could release and kind of like get rid of past trauma and things like that. So, what he's doing, the only thing we can see so far, is that his harmonic rhythm is to constantly keep expanding it and tweaking one thing at a time. So in measure 1, we've got dun, 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 dun. In measure 2, we got dun, 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 dun. And 3 is just straight 8 notes. So he kind of has a progression here, right? Measures 1, 2, and 3. And then he skips measure 1 because he doesn't want to go back to that slow entry. He doesn't want to make it feel like the phrase is coming to a close. So this is what I mean when I say we can start to take classical concepts and apply them to modern music. What do we normally have in the middle of a phrase? A weak cadence. Well, Bartok doesn't have a cadence here. So how does he create the sense of kind of, that forward motion? After measure 3, he doesn't go back to measure 1. So he doesn't go back to our starting point. And that makes us feel like the piece is continuing to develop because our harmonic rhythm is constantly developing. So here we get rhythm 2, and then he gives us rhythm 3 again. So because he's already done 1, 2, 3, he now goes back 2, 3, 4, we kind of have a new figure here. So if we go and look at rehearsal 1 here, let's just figure out what the rhythm is here, and then maybe we can figure something out to talk about. I mean, we're already starting to see stuff in here. And if I miss anything, let me know. When you break down the texture, this is basically what you have. You have this dun, 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 dun. And then let's go one more measure. Okay. So he's playing on this really delicate line between bringing in new material and keeping the old material. But he's giving us a sense that some rhythmic ideas come back. So we've got rhythm 3, it occurs 3 times so far in the opening section. And in rhythm 4 here, we introduce this new idea with the dotted 8 to the 16th note. And also, we introduce this really important figure in part 4 that is now introduced here. And so if we look at rhythm number 6, it looks a lot like rhythm number 3. But what he's done is he has substituted that rhythm for this rhythm here. So, the question is, okay, people are really good at finding patterns. Did Bartok actually sit down and think of a schematic like this? Probably not. But then again, he was a pretty methodical composer. But what we have to realize is, some composers are just better at presenting their ideas in a way that we can understand than others, right? And so Bartok, whether he actually mapped out this entire sequence, it starts with a nice slow rhythm, and then in measure 2, it escalates rhythm a bit. In measure 3, it escalates rhythm some more, and then he goes back, he repeats rhythm 2 so we can kind of get it in our ear, and then he repeats rhythm 3, and then he escalates it more in measure 4, he escalates it more in measure 5 because it's changing, and then he escalates it again in measure 6, but he goes back to rhythm 3 this time. So we kind of have this pattern of 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it's almost like we go to rhythm 3 next. So he slowly, let me try and express this in a more clear way. So 1 is the start. This is where we start the rhythm. Rhythm 2 begins the start of this new idea, right? And then we go 2, 3, 4, 5. And then at rhythm 6, it goes back and it modifies rhythm 3. And so what would be interesting is if we were to keep going through this piece to see how these rhythms continue to escalate. Or is that it? Is that everything for the entire piece? And it looks like he continues to increase the intensity of these rhythms. So the idea here is that Bartok doesn't have a harmonic rhythm to push the piece forward. There are some recurring rhythms that we can find in here, but really what's holding this piece together is he starts with something simple, something you can hear. Right? And then he speeds it up. And then he makes it simple again. So in measure 3, we have a really active measure. It's the most active measure up until measure 3. Measure 2 was the most active measure up until when measure 2 was introduced. So then when we go back to measure 2, we decrease the intensity a little bit. We back off. In measure 3, we bring the intensity back up again. So now we've hit the same level of intensity that we had in measure 3, right? Measure 4, we're now going further with the intensity. We're adding one more bit of stress to the piece. And then measure 5, more stress. Even more stress because in measure 5 we have a 2/4 bar. And this is a problem with analyzing music because it's really hard to believe that that 2/4 bar was there coincidentally and that he just naturally thought of this and it all worked out, because what happens in the next bar? He's changing the harmonic rhythm in a sense. He's giving us a 2/4 bar instead of these 4/4 bars right before he goes on to the next segment where that rhythm 3 is modified slightly. And it's done with a pianissimo marking. So he's also trying to emphasize it from a dynamic standpoint. So there's a harmonic rhythm in here, but it's not in a traditional sense. And he's using the concept of harmonic rhythm. He's using the concept of, in the classical romantic period, we set this consistent kind of pattern that pushes us into the next measure, right? Because it becomes expected. It's almost like you're on a train and you're going. Bartok, though, he is doing it through gradually increasing intensity. So if we go on, and we're just gonna do this first page, I think, just so we can see what's happening. So we have 2 quarter notes here. That rhythm continues here. So it looks like we're getting rhythm 3 again. He's backing off again. It's kind of like a pressure system. He's including rhythm 3 one more time. So he had this big development in the first 6 rhythms. I don't know what measure that is, up through rehearsal 1. And now he's keeping it consistent. And then in the next measure, what does he do? effectively it is the same rhythm even though he's tying it over because we get articulations. So he's continuing to escalate that. We're back to our eighth notes here. And we'll be interested to see what happens in rehearsal marking 2. So those are straight 16ths again. These are straight 16ths also. You know, if nothing else, this really helps you kind of get to know the piece. So what we see happening here is we have that measure 3 rhythm for quite a bit, and then he incorporates a rhythm that was first introduced in measure 6, the measure 4, well, for rhythm 4, where you have this idea. So that idea is now modifying rhythm 3. And then we introduce a new idea, full 16th notes. So then that idea later on, we go back to rhythm 3 here, but then in this measure, it takes rhythm 3 and it modifies it yet again. So it's hard to not say that Bartok is not giving us something familiar. In this case, it seems to be rhythm 3, which is sort of a frame on the first 3 measures because it's something that he comes back to, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, stop on 3, go back to 2, get 3 again. So we get a strong repeat of rhythm 2 and rhythm 3. And then rhythm 3 comes back again here. You'll notice rhythm 2 isn't coming back at this point. Neither is rhythm 1. So rhythm 3 is becoming sort of a pivot to some of these more advanced rhythms. And then we take rhythm 3, we modify it, start adding 16th notes. So would this have worked if Bartok just said, you know, just kind of had this nice pretty melody where you don't have some logic to how the rhythm is pushing the melody forward. This is basically harmonic rhythm because he is emphasizing, he's creating this idea that pushes the music forward, but it doesn't fit our definition of harmonic rhythm because harmonic rhythm actually has to do with actual chords. But it's a principle that you could say that he took from the classical period to enhance his own composition here. Does that make sense? So the idea here is that if you're writing a more modern piece and or even any piece and you feel like the melody is stagnating, maybe look deeper into your composition and say, well, what am I using at a structural level to help push the piece forward? Bartok is going 1, 2, 3, start over, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, start over, 3, 3. So there's like a 3 prolongation. And now I'm going to add those 16th notes in and the figure from motive 4. And he's going to continue to build this. He's going to continue to escalate. The rhythms keep getting faster until a point where maybe they stop escalating. Yeah. So here, straight 16ths over at rehearsal 4 in the second measure. And then in measure 5, there it is, rehearsal 5. He brings back rhythm 1 along with that opening melody. So he's being careful. Like he's setting up because he knows that the first thing you hear in the piece you're going to remember. We tend to hear what happens at the beginning and the end of a piece, right? But rhythm 1 is so unique and it's in such a high profile place that when it then comes back later at rehearsal 5, we recognize it because it's also attached to the melody that we heard from the beginning, just about an octave higher. But then he never goes back to rhythm 2 because he's introducing this other figure that we really started to get. I think it was in rhythm 4. If we keep going through, he's just escalating it further. This is what Bartok means by catharsis. It's this constant, gradual increase in activity. And so now we get these sextuplet figures. He's still trying to increase everything. We've got these really strong 16th notes. Just kind of curious what he does towards the end. Well, let's look what he does at figure 10. Yeah, just relentless. Here he's using these really strong triple stops, the bass. And then 11, back to that opening harmonic rhythm again, back to that opening theme. So the thing is here, if he had modified that opening measure, that opening melodic theme, if he had modified the rhythm for it, it might not have the same impact. So that first rhythm is important because it's so simple and easy for us to hear. And then he just kind of dies out. He slows it down. And I bet if we saw this, if we took it in reverse, yeah, starts here again. At that rhythm 1. Yeah, he's using the same rhythmic pattern to kind of end the piece. And then we do something different at the cadence, the end of the piece. He slows it down to some of the slowest note values had in the entire piece. So when you're kind of analyzing a piece, I mean, this is stuff we don't talk about. We talk about the harmonies, we talk about the harmonic materials he's using, whether it's tonal or atonal. We talk about the form, but we don't often talk about how these rhythms push the melodies forward. And I mean, if it was the same rhythm all throughout, that'd get boring too. So Bartok finds ways to continually reinforce the things that we've already heard, and then he adds something new. So he goes 1, 2, 3. That's all new material. Those are all new rhythms. Then he gives us rhythm 2, rhythm 3 again, but he changes the melody just a little bit. But we still recognize that kind of rhythmic pulse. And then in measure 4, 5, and 6, but really measure 4, well, rhythm 4 and 5, he gives us a new rhythm. So then in measure 6, he goes back to rhythm 2, but he adds something that it learned. It's like this piece is learning as it goes. He adds that motive in, and now we get a new rhythm. So now we have rhythm 6. But then, because you can't just constantly keep changing things, you need to give people a resting point, he goes back to rhythm 3. And then we get new rhythms again. So the idea here, I don't know if this helps explain harmonic rhythm, but one of the things that as we go forward, where it's kind of rare, we're starting to look at more modern pieces along with some of the other stuff we're doing. But as we go forward, one of the things for you to start looking at, it doesn't really matter what chords are being used. That's less important than the harmonic rhythm. You want to, as you analyze these phrases and these pieces that I'm going to start introducing a little bit later, you want to start thinking, what's the harmonic rhythm of this piece? How does it help to frame the phrase? And how does it help to frame each section? So it's not just that section A has theme 1 and section B now has like theme 2 to kind of simplify this. It's what is it about theme 1? What is it about theme 2? Does theme 1 have a unique sequence of harmonic rhythms or just rhythms in general that differ greatly from the second section. These are all things that we need to think about because this is not a standard form course. You're learning real form and analysis. Like when we talk about sentences, periods, hybrid themes, compound themes, small binary, small ternary, all that information is accurate. But what we're adding on to it is something that we only normally get in composition lessons, which is the construction, how you develop a piece. It's such a complex topic. I try in my Elements, the music composition book, to point out that fact that dynamics play a formal role, but it's so difficult to explain that in a book setting. I mean, it would just be such a huge tomb of information to try and explain all this. But I think, like a simple example where we compare Beethoven to Bartok, and we see, if we were to talk about the dynamics, which at some point we need to, we would see the relationships and how they're actually used to define individual sections. And this is why dynamics are not just something to interpret the piece. They're not just something to create a climactic impact. You go from crescendo to forte, right? They're defining the form. And I think if we took this to the next step and we had more time, we'd see that they're also helping to define the rhythm. So all this stuff is important. But I mean, this is what makes Bartok a famous composer, one who we, respect and play. This is what makes him different from somebody that maybe writes a nice melody that's catchy and that we can remember. But when you look deeper, there's nothing else there. It's fluff, right? And at a basic level, with this technique, you can write some really powerful, simple music. It just simply have a harmonic rhythm, know how to develop your motives, and you can write a simple piece that resonates with people. But as most composers, like I think the ones that I'm teaching at least, most of us are trying to create something new or try and put a new slant on something old, you know? And so stuff like this I think is important. I think you mentioned dynamics like once, and it's a part of it, but it's like you get into the rhythm and then you ignore the dynamics, and then you say, okay, I got to look at how the dynamics relate to that too. And then you say, oh yeah, the melody matters also. I should probably look at the melody. Like, what is he using? It's not in a key. Is it 12 tone? So we want to try and figure out everything that Bartok's doing, and that just takes a long time. But that's why a true analysis of a piece takes months to years if it's a good piece. A simple piece, you're going to analyze it in a weekend and be done, you know? But we only scratch the surface in a course like this. But hopefully you get the tools to be able to do this with your own compositions. And I think part of the job here that I have is to show you that these relationships exist whether the composer knows it or not. And that when you have patterns like this, it makes the piece more effective. So in a sea of unrelated material, harmonic, or not harmonic, but in a sea of unrelated material, motives can hold the piece together. That can keep coming back and make it feel like the piece is cohesive. But then if you have that and you're the composer, you should try and maybe take it a step further and say, how can I make all of it related, even if it's subtle? Because I think the key here is that the brain picks up on this stuff somehow. Something about the way we process patterns. The ear is quicker than our mind, and it has to be. It has to be able to just instantly hear stuff and recognize it. And if you hear a cat meowing, and you have to sit here and say, what is that? You just kind of instantly know it's a cat. So the ear is quicker than our intellect. But when we're composing, I think we have to slow things down and insert these connections. So that that one rhythm that ties things together, that's great. But now look at what maybe could tie everything else together too. And I think if you do that, you have a more effective piece. I mean, I don't know for certain. I'm not the composition god here laying down the laws of the land, but In my experience, that's what composers do. That's what the famous ones do. Everything's connected to a degree that makes you just say, screw you, you know, because they do it in such a fluid way and such a natural way. And if they're doing it naturally, that's one thing, but they're still doing it. It's still there, you know, because I've taken compositions from student composers or like at UNLV, and they don't have that level of sophistication. You just can't find it. But in the masters, the ones that we recognize as being these really great composers, even musical theater, you know, um, ones that are doing those big musicals like Wicked, whatever, the patterns are there. So there, Schoenberg talks about this, and other composers talk about it, but they never explain it. They always say the secret rules of music, and these are the secret rules of music because what you're doing is you're teaching how not just have a pretty melody, but how have a piece that somehow just massages the brain and resonates with it so it sticks. You know?